Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Talking Radio YouTube channel. And so today we're speaking to Captain Andrew Evans, better known as ACE. And the purpose behind this webinar that we're hosting today is focusing on two-way communications. We thought it would be a good idea to invite Captain Evans for this meeting and give us his overview from the ATC and pilot perspective. This is the thing that's interesting about Andrew, is better known as ACE, is able to wear both caps. So without further ado, let me go ahead and welcome you. Welcome, ACE. Nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on your webinar or podcast. It's been a privilege to be able to be an air traffic controller for 13 and a half years. I did a little bit of national service air traffic control, and obviously that's helped further my flying career that actually started before the air traffic control bit, doing approach radar and tower control, continuing then onto my commercial and airline transport pilot license. It's obviously helped a lot build a bigger picture of how ATC and the flying side of things fit together.
Definitely, definitely, Ace. So we've got a few questions that are coming from the panel and from interested parties, people that are interested in Talking Radio itself. And the first question that we've got here is they would like to know, the viewers would like to know, how important do you believe is two-way communication between pilot and ATC?
Well, obviously that's the primary form of communication is voice communication over the radio between pilot and air traffic controller. It is the most important way to solve the main aim of air traffic control, which is obviously, as you know, the safe, orderly, expeditious flow of air traffic. So it's very important. It's very important to use standard RT, not to use the overuse of unnecessary RT or add in extra words that are unneeded or unused globally, particularly if you fly into other countries. Like I was in Mexico the other day, or you go to New York, or next thing you're in London, and then you're in Africa. And people have slight variances and slight localisms that actually disrupt the whole idea of ICAO or FAA's way of doing radio communication. So the best way to put it is if you stick to the standard basics, and the Brits have a very good document, the CAP 413, which is very well it's very concise. They have little booklets. It's a very easy way of seeing the basics of communication. And like I said, there's some small differences in some countries. The Brits will have differences at the back of their CAP 413, which is different to ICAO. Like instead of saying things like go ahead, they do the pass your message, as you know very well. And pass your message actually, it's actually a good thing, and I actually promote that as well. So I've always been one in the sense that if a pilot can say as little as possible to achieve a common goal, or if an air traffic controller can say as little as possible to achieve a common goal using the common basic RT radio telephony, then we're achieving the safe, orderly, expeditious flow of traffic. So there's no point in an air traffic controller, for example, step climbing guys unnecessary just because, that's what the book says. I'm doing some radar control backed up by procedural backed up by radar, whatever it is. If the guy's got unlimited climb or descent, air traffic controller should actually just climb and descent the guy to the final level. And as a matter of interest, that's actually how it works in the States. You fly into, and it's actually picking up in a lot of other countries as well, where you'll be in your cruising level, flying into a place, say, like San Francisco, or the other day into Mexico, which is not the States, but a very ICAO standard, which is nice to see. You go into a place like Mexico, that's proper ICAO. It's like flying into everyone, or not Mumbai, for example, but Mumbai is a very, they stick to the standard RT. They've got other problems, which is more a cultural problem, where too many people try to talk too often, and they sort of might think the more you heard, the more you talk, the smarter you are, which actually defeats the whole air traffic control thing, where we want to actually say as little as possible to achieve the maximum benefit. Like I was saying, flying into San Francisco or Mexico, the en route air traffic controller will basically, while you're in the cruise, at some point about 10 to 50 miles before you start your descent, they know where you start your descent, because air traffic controllers know how to do a 3 times table. They know what your top of descent point is. So they'll just say something like, in my case, it'll be Cathay 883, descend via the star. And that's it. They will just say descend via the star. And
Wow.
basically, that will take you from your cruise level, because they've now given you descent via the star. There'll be a couple of step descents on the way down, and you'll end up at the maybe the initial approach fix or the TMA fix, which leads onto a RNAV procedure, which will terminate at the beginning of a final fix at a on an ILS, for example. So that what I'm getting at here is they make one transmission. The next transmission is you'll get handed off to, say, the terminal or the approach guy or NOPAC or whatever it is, and they will say something like cleared for the approach. Easy as that. That's two transmissions. The next transmission, it might be a speed control, and normally all the speeds are on these procedures. So you'll then fly the speed onto the ILS, and it's like clockwork. You know, they if they need to do slight vectors or spacing or reduce your speed earlier or speed you up earlier, they make those calculations. And like I say, it's like clockwork. You eventually just end up on the ILS. They'll then contact the tower. Into a place like San Francisco, there'll be 3 aircraft ahead of you, 2 on the parallel on the right of you. There'll be departing traffic on the cross runway intersections ahead of you. But the first contact to San Francisco Tower, probably at about 12 miles out, they'll clear you to land. This is a bit of an FAA difference. ICAO do it under certain circumstances, but FAA will clear you to land. Now, in the meantime, while you've been cleared to land 12 miles out, there are 2 aircraft landing ahead of you. There's the 2 aircraft on the right-hand runway that are landing on the parallel next to you, which will possibly at least one of those guys will actually cross the runway ahead of you. And in between all this chaos, there'll be departing traffic off the intersection runway. So we'll be landing on 28 left, for example, and there's a 01 left and 01 right, and they'll be launching traffic, all the commuters, 737s, MD-83, that kind of traffic off the intersection runway. And which makes San Francisco actually such a nice place to fly into. There's a lot of activity happening. You'll be getting down to 200 foot on that ILS where you've been cleared to land 12 miles back. And at 200 feet, you basically look out the window, you make that decision, are we going to land, we're not going to land, go around. And at that point, the runway will just magically clear. The guy taking off the cross runway will just pass the intersection, the guy crossing ahead of you, the guy landing ahead of you will clear. And what I'm getting at there is all of this chaos has happened, but I've only had 3 transmissions made to me. Descend via the star, cleared for the approach, contact tower, and the tower cleared to land. So let's make it 4 clearances. And that is how important the clear and concise RT should be between air traffic controller and pilot. There's no ambiguity. They just keep it simple. And that's the easy solution to making pilot's ATC communication that it works like clockwork.
Oh, that's really interesting. Also interesting how you have defined the RT in a compressed format and how it really works. And that would be something which hopefully other sectors, other countries around the world are following, especially with airspace as it's covered and the airspace starts picking up again in terms of traffic movements. So really fascinating. Okay, thanks, Ace. The next question we got is this question. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer it better than me. Were you a pilot first? Were you trained pilot? Were you trained ATC? But the question is generic: is how did you overcome the fear of actually talking on the two-way radio with ATC or with the pilot?
Okay, so just my background again, I started actually with my private pilot license prior to being selected as an air traffic controller, and that was through the basics of my flying instructor basically said, you need to get a job to help pay for this PPL that you're trying to do, because you can't sit around doing one or 2 hours every few months trying to do a PPL. And I learned at an airfield which had unmanned procedures, so out of Springs in South Africa. And so we did the Springs traffic, this is wherever I'm taxiing. So I knew all the basic calls by the time I was busy with my PPL and by the time I started with air traffic control. In this time, during my PPL syllabus, I had to do a thing which is called controlled airfield. It's one of the part of the syllabus to get your PPL. And my flying instructor actually took me across to Rand Airport, and one of our legend ATCs from Johannesburg, who now works in St. Helena, Gwyneth Howe, and another young lady was also working there at the time. And that was my first introduction to ATC, was Rand Airport, where incidentally is where you and I met, didn't it? And going into Rand, it actually, maybe my introduction through the flying, it actually seemed like, wow, this is how it's actually done. I didn't even know there was air traffic controllers. I didn't even know who sat in the tower, or that these people actually spoke to pilots. I thought you just jump in a plane and go fly and you broadcast your intentions. But so I didn't actually have a fear of talking on the radio at all. Probably back in those days, the difficulty that we had right up to the time that I did my commercial pilot license 10 years later is we never wore headsets. And so back then you always turn in the radio, the speaker up, and you're shouting on the little mic there, and ATC obviously going, what's this guy doing? Shouting on the radio, not realizing that all the other professional pilots out there are using headsets. So once you start using headsets, it's actually like, wow, this is even easier. So my recommendation there as well, to get over the fear of flying, get a good headset by the time you start flying, which everybody does now. It's part of your starter pack. But so that obviously make life as easy as possible, and that will make your radio communications as easy as possible. So have a good headset, make sure that ATC can hear you, and make sure you can understand, you can hear them. And then the other thing is make sure you understand what is the standard RT from air traffic control, so that you can also try emanate that and give back the standard response that they expect to hear. If you cover those little bases, you shouldn't have a fear for speaking on the radio. I actually recall back when I did a spot landing competition in about 1989. I came in and I was doing this horrible approach, and there was another student pilot with me, and we were like trying to do the spot landing, and it wasn't working out. I don't know. I was trying to get too low and too slow, and it was going terrible. And I thought, okay, this is the time that you've got to do a go around. So power, flap, climbing away there. And at the same time, instinctively, I read for the hand mark. And so this is not the way to do things. You should aviate first and then navigate, make sure the plane's going in the right direction, and then speak on the radio. But there I was pretty dumb at the time. I grabbed the mic, flying the aeroplane. Now this is a hand mark, no headset, powers up, taking the flap away, trying to fly the plane. And I've got the mic in my hand and I'm busy shouting over there, Echo X-ray Oscar is going around, And looking back, that was pretty stupid. It was even commented after at the prize giving about, that was pretty spectacular. You're doing this like crazy approach, and next thing you're speaking on the radio, like they didn't expect that. So I never had a fear of speaking on the radio. But what I'm trying to point out is there's a right time to speak on the radio. That wasn't it. But that's how you learn. You try and not crash the plane, but try have the transmissions put in the right time, in the right order. You shouldn't, with the right instructor, this is another problem. Fortunately for me, I had elderly instructors that were airline training captains. They flew King Airs. They weren't 200-hour instructors. The thing now is the 200-hour type instructor will say, oh, we're going to fly into this airfield and it's controlled. And do you know what to say? And they put the fear into the student. And that's where the fear comes in. It's not your, if you've got a well-seasoned mentor, as in an older pilot, that can talk to you like we are doing now. If hopefully somebody watches this, and they can take something away from it, and they can say like, be bold on the radio. Pick up the mic and say, whenever you want to, the Johannesburg information, this is Echo X-ray Oscar requesting a radio check, verify my transponders working. I'm squawking, use a non-discrete code if you can, if you know what any of them are, but try pluck one from somewhere and just say, hey man, this is Alpha Charlie Echo, overhead Buffelsfontein, 6,300 feet, I'm squawking this code. How do you read this transmission? And then they will come back. But what you should expect, hopefully, in the real world, is they'll say, Alpha Charlie Echo is identified over Buffelsfontein, 6,300 feet, squawking 4711. I'm just using that as a generic code for right now. But don't be afraid to make those little calls to make yourself more confident on the radio. Don't be afraid to speak to Joburg Tower when you are outside the CTR, for example, and do a radio check. They're not always that busy. And like I said earlier, if air traffic controllers are doing their job properly, there is less transmissions. The whole idea is less transmission, less is more. The less transmissions you make, the more work can actually be done.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense.
And I've actually, I'm one of the fortunate. I've had the good fortune of flying with you as well in and around the Joburg general flying area, and seeing you in action. And yes, you definitely apply the aviate, navigate, communicate principle 100%. So yeah, it's always nice to see that. We've got another question here, which kind of rolls on from what you've just told us. And the question is, does an ATC judge a pilot by their skills on the radio?
100%. 100%. Because as soon as an air traffic controller hears a pilot stutter or be unsure, and I'm not targeting air traffic controllers in a sense, what I'm trying to say is they will, if you look at any of those videos on YouTube and you look up the famous ones like New York, for example, and they will go, Air China, hold your position, confirm you have marshal in sight type thing. And the Air China guy, because he's been shouted at by the air traffic controller, he's now intimidated and his command of English is not that great. And next thing he's going, Air China, marshal in sight, we proceed to bay. And ATC will come back and say, negative, I did not tell you, you must hold position. So yes, they definitely judge your command of the readback, the command of your English language proficiency. And that's why it's very important if you want to fly internationally. If you want to fly domestic in China or in Africa or in Madrid or whatever small country in the world, you can easily overcome these problems because your accent and your understandability is culturally the same. But the minute you leave that country and you fly to another country, like even in South Africa, if you fly from Johannesburg to Vilanculos, for example, in Mozambique, they are slightly different because of the Portuguese culture there. So they will give you standard things in their standard format, which is also very archaic, but you need to understand why they say certain things in what certain manner. They also do procedural control over there, which they know that you can see traffic on TKs. You don't need to tell them. They might tell you about the traffic and provide some kind of procedural separation, which then that's the way of them controlling. You don't start controlling the ATC. The ATC controls you. If they want you to know if you want to do a VMC descent, other traffic in sight, they will ask you for it. You can offer it, obviously, but don't try to take command of the situation because one or the other has got a poor command of the English language. And like I say, in the English language proficiency, a 4 is the absolute bare minimum. If you've got a 4 in your license, you need to work on your English language proficiency, specifically the aviation English language proficiency. If you've just been given one by doing a quick chat to an examiner, and you're a level 4, that's not good enough. You need to go online. You need to go to these schools that do the specific training and try better that 4 to at least a 5. If you're a non-English native speaker, a 5 is acceptable, but just to hang on to a 4 for the rest of your life, you're not doing enough. You need to go out there, at least get a 5. A lot of us, we're very fortunate because English is our first language and we get on with it. But again, and to answer your question, air traffic controller does, if he has a guy who's really smart and slick on the radio, they straight away, this guy's a good pilot. I hate the word good pilot because there are no good pilots. The only good pilots I've seen are at funerals and they're always dead. So get away from that good pilot thing. Air traffic controllers, if they hear a good voice, they think, this guy knows what he's doing, good pilot. There's always 2 people on the plane. The guy speaking on the radio is the relaxed guy because he's the pilot monitoring and he's watching the other guy do the hard work, sweating, trying to work out a 3 times table. Has ATC got me on the right profile, etc. So what you hear on the radio, and even as a pilot, when you're listening to an air traffic controller, we'll often hear a screaming skull type of air traffic controller. Yeah, Cathay this, turn left now, descend this, speed this. And then the very next guy, and I'm not picking on either cultures or whatever, the very next guy will take over the same position. And you'll just say, Cathay 833 from Lines Cleared Approach, report established. And there's no screaming, shouting, nothing. And he's achieving the exact same goal. So from a pilot point of view, I look at those ATCs and I'm going, there's one guy, sounds to me like he's doing a pretty good job. But the person that's actually doing the screaming and shouting there, she's achieving the same goal, but she sounds extremely stressed. So I think she should have been a librarian. She shouldn't be doing approach radar. And I'd say she, he, whatever. It's all intertwined there. But if the ATC is calm, the pilot's calm. If the ATC raises their voice and speed and tempo, the pilot's going, wow, these guys are busy. In the meantime, the very next guy that takes over doesn't sound busy at all. And the same is from a pilot point of view. If a pilot starts speaking fast and using the wrong RT, the air traffic controller is going to look at this guy and say, oh, he's an idiot. He probably should, he shouldn't be driving a car unsupervised type of thing. And he's flying a bloody 747. So definitely air traffic controllers and pilots both ways, they determine the pilot's skills or the air traffic controller's skills, be that may, via the way that they communicate on the radio. So communication is key. Keep it sweet, simple, and then everybody thinks you're a good pilot or a good ATC.
See, thanks, Ace. That's actually a nice overview of and actually an expansion on the question itself, because you're building from both sides. Ideally, I think what you're saying as well is if the person is relaxed, actually understands their RT procedures and just follows through in terms of their communication, you're going to have a much easier flow of traffic from either both pilot and the ATC's perspective. So thanks very much. Now, it seems like these questions are just rolling on perfectly from what we are hearing in terms of your explanation. Okay, the next question is, and we lead into the final question, but the second last question that we received is, do you think that the communication itself between pilot and ATC in its given and how you've explained it today will ever change? In other words, will it move away from two-way voice communication and go more to like what you and I understand as CPDLC, controller pilot data link communication, or is two-way communication yet to stay via VHF radio?
Okay, the VHF will always be there at some point, because you can do all the CPDLCs and PDCs, so the controller pilot data link, or the pre-departure clearance, which can be sent to the aircraft via the ACARS or CETA, whatever method you're using. It replaces the ATC, but then it still needs to be some. It's just to get the ball rolling. So to get some of this stuff, to get your clearance, for example, there's still an ATC in the background that needs to issue the clearance. It's an air traffic control clearance. So you still need some input from the service provider, giving an aircraft the clearance. I should imagine at some point this could be totally autonomous, but at the moment it will still be monitored by the air traffic service provider, not necessarily a controller to give that initial clearance, but someone who's giving that clearance on behalf of the controller. Moving on for the basic clearances at an airfield, the takeoff clearance, a landing clearance, I don't believe that in the very near future will be taken over via a non-voice communication. However, once you're up and going and CPDLC is the way to go, you're entering remote areas or oceanic areas, or even across Europe. I'll give you an example. Once we leave the Turkey airspace, for example, when we're flying from the Middle East to Europe, you'll start off somewhere out Hungary direction. They'll Bucharest or one of those crowd. They'll ask you to log on CPDLC. So once you're now on CPDLC, there's a bit of mixture between voice and controller pilot data link. So initially they will say you'll establish communication with them, and they will tell you continue CPDLC, you'll continue CPDLC. And at some point they might just pop up on voice and say, Cathay, contact Vienna on this frequency. And then you contact them on that frequency. Obviously, it's all that 0.833 spacing, which most people can only understand three things at a time. So if you give me a frequency like 1245, that's easy. But once it goes 125757 or whatever the frequency is, 127575, if you're not prepared for that frequency, sometimes you get to the 12757 and then you go, too much. please say again the frequency. Now, if they send that frequency to you on the CPDLC, which happens in Europe, once you've logged on, you've spoken to the first controller, they'll often hand you off via CPDLC. They'll send you a message, change frequency. You'll then contact on voice the next frequency, and they will just acknowledge you. So you'll say, for example, Cathay 255, flight level 310, and they'll come back and they'll say Cathay 255. That's it. The next thing you'll get, and all of the CPDLC gets seemingly handed off between FRR to FRR to next controller. So a lot of the communication has now been eradicated, and there's no need for continuous talking on the radio. So the radio is fairly quiet. So I suppose to answer the question, a lot of the en route stuff will be replaced by data link, but it's that data link clearances and frequency changes and areas of responsibility will still be held by an air traffic controller. So the same qualification, but it's just shifting more to a digital format of controlling aeroplanes, if that makes sense.
So could we say for the viewers and listeners that CPDLC is something like, if you could compare it to WhatsApp, is that a good comparison in terms of communication?
Look, once again, just like your previous stuff, it goes back to communication. You keep it standard, you know. So it's like it'll be confirm flight level 310, and you'll then send a response like affirm. You send it back to them. So it's a sort of a WhatsApp, but it's a common text formatting. I want to request a climb. I'll just go there. I put 380 request climb, and I hit send. It'll send it to the air traffic control unit. They'll have a look at it. Maybe somebody in between, they'll shout across to the controller and say, hey, Cathay is looking for climb level 330. And they will then input it back and send it back to me. And it'll just be the format of climb flight level 310, report maintaining. I can then arm that message that once you've reached level 330, it will arm the message and automatically send it back to the air traffic service unit. Okay. So yes, it's like a shortened form of WhatsApp messaging, but it's a very aviation. You can use plain language. There is the option to put plain text there, like, do you think that after 3 hours we will be able to do this, that, whatever, you know, or resume normal speed, or get climb, do fuel? You can put a standard WhatsApp type text in there, and they can respond to you with a standard WhatsApp type text. But generally, once again, we try to keep everything standard to the minimum.
Okay, thanks very much for the explanation. So last question for today on this webinar podcast is, do you, from your experience in flying and in air traffic control, do you have any tips for first-time user of a two-way radio?
Okay, first of all, obviously, first-time user of a two-way radio. This obviously could be the air traffic controller point of view, and it can also be the pilot point of view, as well as anybody who's related to aviation, in this particular case, aviation radio use. So your tug drivers. If I can think back to air traffic control days, it's like when we used to do voice ATIS, you put the ATIS out via voice. The first time you do it, you're so worried about, do I get the format right? Like, this is Johannesburg information Delta surface. You do that. If you and I did it right now, it should roll off our tongues. We can do an ATIS without even thinking about it. But if you remember back to the very first days, you do it every half hour. You have to do this ATIS, and you'll be quite nervous, and you'll have to redo it 2 or 3 times because somebody tickles you from behind or something, and you start laughing by the time you get to the Q&H, and now I've got to redo this whole ATIS. So the tip would be is try and make it as natural as possible, just like us talking now. This is not, we're not preloaded by looking at any script. We're not looking at a script talking, it's just natural talking. So if you just think of it, I'm going to do the ATIS. Good afternoon, this is Johannesburg Information Delta, the service 1330 degrees at 10 knots. Runway 03 left and right in use, certain stars enforced, you know, and just, you must be able to get that to roll off your tongue. So armchair RT, like I've just done. Joburg Tower, good day, this is Cathay 748 requesting start, flight level 310 with four crew or whatever it is, passenger, whatever. Just know what you're going to say in advance, but get to the point that you you don't have to think about, I'm going to say this and then key the mark and say it. You should be able to get to a point where you just key the mark and it should roll off your tongue. So Cathay 748 request taxi or Cathay 748 taxi, whatever is the shortest RT that you can put in place to be clear. But what I'm getting at is become natural, that when you key the mark, you know what you're going to say. Obviously, you make mistakes every now and then. Even the most professional pilots with 20,000 hours make mistakes. The same as air traffic controllers make mistakes. That's just human nature. But practice on the radio, do armchair flying. If you've got another student with you, a tug driver or an air traffic controller, if you're friends with those, and this is the good thing, people do tend to hang out in pubs or go to the flying club and chat to each other. They talk just like we are now. And that's where they can say, oh, the other day I called ready for takeoff out of Rand and the tower controller came back and said, confirm you are ready for departure, because what is the correct terms? Stick to the correct terms. Report ready for departure. Takeoff is, that's very Mickey Mouse, like PPL type pilot sort of saying stuff. And I'm not knocking them because we all learn somewhere. But try to do it right the first time. So communicate with people in the environments of when you're relaxed, having a beer with somebody at a pub or dinner or at the flying club, when you meet other pilots. Go out there and meet people. You can't do this from your house. You can't send little WhatsApp messages to people, oh, this happened and what do I do next? Go out and interact with people. Communication is key. That's where you'll iron out all these little problems with your RT and issuance of clearances. And why do air traffic controllers sometimes do step climbs when they could have just done direct climbs? They might have their own limitations that I might not be aware of that day. For example, a handoff between the approach and area sector, which should restrict them. Or they might have a radio limitation that they have to do more of a procedural backed up by radar type controlling. 99% of the time, this stuff runs smoothly, and it's not the case. But we don't always have the big picture. No one really has the big picture because the pilot doesn't know what's going on with ATC half the time, and ATC half the time doesn't know. They think they might know how to fly an airplane, but I can tell you it's a lot more complex than just thinking you're vectoring guys on and you made this aircraft land. There's a lot of things going on. And I've flown with even the most competent, I don't want to say competent pilots, but the most educated pilots, doctors. You won't believe it. There's dentists and doctors and professors that end up becoming pilots. Very smart people that sometimes don't exactly fit in the top personality indicator for a pilot. But these very smart people, when the crunch comes to crunch and they're under pressure, they will battle to do a 3 and 4 times stable. And things start running away from you. So back to your point, what to do? Go, if you're a pilot or a tug driver or someone like that, go up to the air traffic control tower where you can. If you need to get permits, get the permits. Go sit and chat to an ATC. If you need to get the permissions through the chief air traffic controller, whoever's in place, some of the military airfields might even be an option to go to. If you're out living Longabon way, try speak to one of the people in charge there and see if you can visit the tower and go sit and watch what an ATC actually does. What markings they do when they're speaking to a tug driver, when they're speaking to a pilot, or when they simply pick up the telephone to speak to an adjacent unit. The type of format, the way they speak is pretty standard. It's not a chit-chat, free for all. It's this guy's ready for departure, requesting ATC clearance. Everything is clear and concise, and that's the whole point about this communication thing, is to reduce errors, to keep things safe and keep things flowing. Obviously, we also want more traffic. We want to improve our traffic. People always talk about, my airfield had 450 movements today, or my airfield had 1,300. And then sometimes I look and I say, look, the top 10 airfields used to always be in the States. They're not anymore, but they used to be. And you say, there's a reason why a place like San Francisco can move the amount of traffic it moves, because they make a lot of RT space by reducing a lot of the RT. And if ATC clear you to land out 12 miles back, and there's a whole lot of things happening in front of you, aircraft crossing the runway, takeoffs off the intersection runways, all of that stuff's happening. And if you just go around because you see, there's still a guy ahead of me, I'm going to go around now, ATC will be all over you and say, I cleared you to land. And the whole reason why they're doing this is to make more RT space so that they can move more traffic. And more traffic, more business, bigger paychecks.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting term you used. I've never heard it before. Is the term RT space, and that defines radio communication, keeping it short and concise, which you said as well, from both points of view. So really good tips that you're giving us. Everybody, thank you for watching today. We really thank you for being part of our Talking Radio YouTube channel. We hope that the listeners out there have learned something from Ace. He comes with a wealth of experience, and very few people that you're going to meet that wear both the pilot and the ATC cap with such distinction and such professionalism. So thanks very much, Ace. All the best on your side, and to the viewers, we look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Thanks to the viewers, and all the best going forward. Cheers, Dylan.